Hey, Bastish B for 64K and welcome to my second documentary. This is the complete history of Thalamus.
Thalamus, the complete history. 1986 to 1993.
So Thalamus was a company that every time I saw that iconic logo, whether it was loading up a game or in a magazine, I just knew I was in for good quality and something just a little bit unique. Okay, so let's start off with the brief origins of the company. 1986 saw the formation of Thalamus, a software publishing company that was created as an offshoot of the magazine publisher Newsfield. But in order to understand Thalamus's purpose, let's jump back a few more years to 1983 with the creation of Newsfield, who were formed by Roger Keane, Franco Frey and Oliver Frey. They realized there was a huge gap in the market for video game magazines and set about creating some of the UK's most beloved tomes, including Crash and Zap 64. Oliver Frey, one of the founders and an artist himself, would end up illustrating the covers for Crash, Zap 64, Amex, and many more. His unique art style was a driving factor in the magazine's successful runs. And let's jump back to 1986, where the founders decided it would be very advantageous to open a software publishing company to go along with their successful gaming magazines, and thus Thalamus was born. Andrew Wright was assigned the position of company director. He was a former PR man for Activision, and Newsfield staff writer Gary Liddon was appointed technical executive. They all collectively agreed that the Commodore 64 was going to be the system of choice due to the large amount of C64 contacts they had made in the industry through Zap 64 magazine. And with all the behind-the-scenes business in line, it was now time to find the talented programmers and start releasing some games themselves. Okay, so let's get this started. We're going to go through Thalamus' history year by year. I'm going to tell you about all their games that they released, all 22 of them. We're also going to learn a little bit more about the company history and some of their star programmers. But in order to do that, we need to go right back to the beginning, to their first release.
1986 saw the release of one game.
So, with their offices set up in Canonbury, North London, and management in place, it was time to make some games. The first programmer to step up to the plate was also Chance Encounter, which led to a very beneficial relationship for everyone. Thalamus and the team from Zap were attending a PCW conference in London, promoting the newly formed company, when they were approached by a man named Stavros Fasoulas. He gave them his pitch and was hired immediately for their first game, which was going to be released at the end of that same year. Stavros was a Finnish programmer and game designer who got his start on programming at school, learning BASIC in 1982, and in 1984 he purchased a Commodore 64. Sanxion was his first game with them, and he had already completed most of the game and just needed another 2.5 months to finish it off for release. Sanxion was a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that had really great graphics and style, and its music was by legendary Rob Hubbard, and the track is known as Thalamus, and is still to this day loved by many for its sonic excellence. It was so popular at the time that it's got its own synthesized release on the cover tape for Zap 64, and Zap ended up giving the game a Sizzler Award, which was reserved for the top quality games, praising graphics, sound, and lastability of its 40 levels. This led to an inevitable squabble about the validity of the review by rival magazine Commodore User, due to Zap's built-in ties with Thalamus. Regardless of that, the game was a massive C64 hit on all levels, and a Spectrum port would eventually be released in 1989. The ball was rolling and Thalamus were on their way, with still 2 more games to be released by Stavros. 1987 was going to be an amazing year for them.
1987 saw the release of 3 games.
Next, we got Stavros' second game for Thalamus, namely Delta, or Delta Patrol in North America, which is another side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that is tough as nails but pretty rewarding. Like most shooters, you have to power yourself up quickly, which dramatically improves the game, with speed being your essential tool, and memorizing patterns is gonna get you pretty far. The game sports some really cool metallic stylized graphics, which became sort of a staple with Thalamus games, and more rocking Rob Hubbard music graced this shooter gem. Another aspect of the music is the excellent inclusion of being able to mix the intro music as the game loaded like some sort of mad DJ. It was such an innovative and brilliant feature. Our second game for 87 is unfortunately Stavros' swan song for Thalamus and the C64 in general. It was called Cudex, the Quest for Ultimate Dexterity. This game was unlike his previous 2 and was an original stylized puzzle game where your goal as a metal ball was to escape each level before the time ran out. It was deviously difficult, but another game with enough originality to keep me coming back for more even after countless deaths. Graphics again have that awesome metallic look and are well animated, and the music by Last Ninja 2's Matt Gray is mesmerizing with its big bass and really good sound effects. It received mostly good reviews. Unfortunately for Thalamus and us, Stavros was recalled to Finland to complete his military national service and thus ended his short but fantastic run with them. Also, during the production of Codex, we also got some major shakeups at Thalamus, with Andrew Wright leaving and returning to Activision, and Gary Liddon also left the company to pursue his goal of being a gaming programmer. I'll have more on Gary Liddon's story at the end. Thalamus quickly brought in Paul Cooper, who was an ex-Electric Dreams development manager, to head up the company, and he in turn brought them programmer and SID musician Martin Walker, whose previous two games, Chameleon and Back to the Future, were published through Electric Dreams. And in that same year, we saw Martin Walker's efforts for Thalamus released as Hunter's Moon, a truly sublime puzzle shoot-'em-up game that is hard to describe and is extremely original on all levels. The game's excellent graphics really fit in well with Stavros' trilogy, coupled with the brilliant music and sound effects again by Matt Gray, really set this apart from most other games at the time. With its 128 levels, you are in for a real challenge that's well worth the plunge. The game garnered great reviews at the time, but didn't sell as well as Stavros' trilogy. But Thalamus were on a roll, and 88 was just around the corner.
1988 saw the release of two games.
In 1988, we got two bona fide C64 classics from Thalamus, Hawkeye and Armalite. Let's start with Hawkeye, an excellent side-scrolling run-and-gun game by the Boys Without Brains, a Dutch C64 demo scene group hailing from the Netherlands. From the cinematic intro to the gorgeous looking and colourful sprites, Hawkeye just oozes quality. And let's not forget a brilliant soundtrack from another legendary SID maestro, Jerome Tower of Maniacs of Noise. 12 levels of shooting platform fun await, and I played this game like an absolute maniac as a kid. I just found it so addictive. The game garnered a Zap Gold Medal, the highest award, and was reviewed favourably across the board. Next was Armalite, a horizontal scrolling shoot-'em-up that's in my top 5 for the system. It's just that good. The awesome metal-style graphics return, excellent two-player co-op, and absolutely perfect score and sound effects by Martin Walker round out one of the C64's essential plays. With massive levels and awesome boss battles, it's one of my personal Thalamus favorites. The game was marketed as Delta 2 by Thalamus to drum up interest, but the game really plays nothing like it.
1989 saw the release of two games.
First up for 89 was Snare, another strange puzzle shooter hybrid that was different from most games at the time. Actually, it's still quite unique, even now. In the game, you have to make your way to the center of a 20-level maze with traps, robots, and all manner of death in your path. It feels like a turn-based strategy game, with the fact that you can stop at any time and nothing will happen, giving you time to plot your next move. It's strange but well made, with decent graphics and some nice Martin Walker music and sound effects. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, but a solid title nonetheless. Next was Retrograde by Steve and John Rowlands. Their previous game was the excellent Cyberdyne Warrior that was published by Hewson. This was their first game of many with Thalamus, and it's a brilliant start to the partnership. The game is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up essentially, with a grinding system involving killing for cash and upgrading your battle suit. There's 7 levels to battle through, where nuking the actual planet gets you to the next one. Top-notch graphics and sound by Steve Rowland, and an amazingly addictive game from Apex Computer Productions. It's highly recommended. Thalamus also tried to branch out from the C64-bit with some 8-bit ports of previous games like Sanction and Delta to the Spectrum. The sales of those games were not very good due to the system's dwindling market, which led them to actually cut back on any other ports until some forays into the 16-bit Amiga market.
1990 saw the release of 5 games.
1990 turned out to be their most fruitful year as far as games go. Let's start with the 3 C64 releases. First up was Heatseeker, another bizarre game even by Thalamus standards, where you play a robot leg trying to clean up the environment while battling nature itself. Oh, the irony. I honestly never understood this game as a kid, but I did appreciate its art house style and unique gameplay mechanics. So like Snare, it may not be to everybody's liking. Next was Summer Camp, Thalamus' new direction and style for the company, who was trying to appeal to the platform gaming console crowd that was gaining major popularity at the time. Maximus Mouse was the original mascot, and this was his first of 2 games. Summer Camp was a traditional colorful platform game that I quite enjoyed back in the day, programmed almost exclusively by John Ferrari, with excellent music by Mark Clements. The game did pretty well and was another hit. The Roland's second game for Thalamus was keeping with the cutesy platform mascot genre with Creatures, which was a scrolling platform game with devious puzzle and torture screens. It was cute but super violent. I just couldn't get enough of it. I played this first as a Zap64 demo tape and immediately went out and bought the full retail game. Brilliant graphics and animation, more unforgettable tunes from Steve Rowlands, and another great mascot in Clyde Radcliffe. It garnered excellent reviews and the game is a C64 classic for sure. Next was the Amiga version of Cudex that went under the name Mandrel and was distributed by Epix in the US. A PC port was also available. The game wasn't a direct port and has some of the same basic gameplay mechanics, but with a completely different look and feel. It's definitely not as memorable as the C64 original, and that can be pretty much said for all their future C64 ports for that matter. Venom Wing, another Amiga game, was a side-scrolling shoot 'em up with nice graphics and music. I actually quite enjoyed this game, even though it got some very mediocre reviews, and proved yet again that Thalamus' strengths still lay in the 8-bit market.
1991 and 1992 saw the release of 4 games.
1991 and 92 were strong years on the software side, but business-wise, things were starting to fall apart. Newsfield, the magazine publishing side, hit some major financial troubles, and all productions on their then-current magazines were halted. Luckily for them, Europress, another UK magazine publisher, swooped in and bailed them out financially, but the writing was on the wall. Over the course of the next 2 years, all the classic magazine runs came to an end. Thalamus, as a software publisher, managed to survive Newsfield's demise and was rebranded Thalamus Europe. During all this chaos, some real gaming gems still made it out. First up in 1991, we got Armalite Final Run on the Amiga. Not a direct port of the C64 classic, but more of a remix with a completely different graphic style and music. It's nowhere near as good as the C64 version, and the soundtrack pales in comparison. But if you ignore the source material, it's a decent scrolling shoot 'em up for the Amiga. Next is 1992's Winter Camp, the sequel to Summer Camp and Maximus Mouse's final game. It was a much improved game over the original with 8 stages of very different gameplay styles. Nice graphics and music by John Ferrari and Mark Clement again make this my preferred game in the series. Next was Creatures 2, also in 1992, the sequel to Clyde Radcliffe's first adventure and the Roland's last C64 game for Thalamus. And boy did they go out in style. This time around the torture screens take a much bigger part in the game and the platforming action is a bit less. Lots of mini games, amazing graphics and sound led it to its gold medal award in Zap, and fantastic reviews across the board. It's a real benchmark in C64 gaming. And lastly for 1992 was another Amiga game I'd honestly never heard of before, called Bora Bora, the Planet of Doom, a side-scrolling run-and-gun platform game that is kind of similar in style to the Amiga's Jim Power. It sports nice colourful graphics and a pretty catchy soundtrack. I only spent a little bit of time with this capturing the footage, but it was quite an enjoyable romp without being anything special. But also like Armalite Final Run, it took quite a beating in the reviews, as per all Thalamus' 16-bit games. They also managed to put out an Atari ST version of Creatures, which was slammed as well on all levels.
1993 saw the release of 2 games.
And this was it. With a combination of rising video game productions, the 8-bit market almost completely dried up at this point, and the expensive productions of their 16-bit games that had not panned out until this point in terms of sale, they had no choice but to shut down. Many Amiga games were in production and all got cancelled. They did manage to squeeze out one more Amiga game, the Amiga version of Creatures, but just like the Atari ST version, it was slammed. But before the final curtain call, let's look at Thalamus' last commercially released game that was befitting it was on the C64 title to go out on. Nobby the Aardvark, another of their cutesy platform adventure romps that has really impressive graphics and decent music. It was no Creatures, but with the 7 massive levels and tons of variety. It was a pretty good swan song. Unfortunately, most people would not really get to enjoy it because of the infuriating difficulty of the game and the fact that it had a really low production run. So during the making of this documentary, I read and watched a lot of interviews with the programmers that worked on Thalamus games, and not one of them ever had anything really negative to say about the company. The sense was that Thalamus was determined to release interesting stylized games with good gameplay, and only release them when they were ready. The originality of those titles, and just seeing that logo in any magazine advert, that always made me just trust that I was in for something strange but unique, and it was definitely going to push my C64 to the limit. So with the full company history out of the way, you're probably wondering, whatever happened to all the movers and shakers at Thalamus? Roger Keane, one of the original founders of Newsfield, has been involved in the industry in one way or another, having published the excellent book Ocean, the History with Chris Wilkins, also with artwork by Oliver Frey, another founder still active in his video game art, having contributed covers to the recent Kickstarter books like Crash and Zap 64 annuals, as well as the sublime fantasy art of Oliver Frey, which is a must purchase. Gary Liddon, Thalamus' original technical executive, has had a stunning programming career, working on ports of the Mortal Kombat games Crackdown 2 on the Xbox 360, as well as starting his own company, Ruffian Games, in 2008, where he is currently the studio head. Stavros Vasalis has almost completely fallen off the face of the world, shunning technology and the spotlight fame that his games brought him. Information on him is pretty scarce, with only the fact that he may be living in San Francisco and does not own a computer or have internet access. It would make an interesting story if somebody could actually find him. Programmer Martin Walker continued on mostly as a SID musician on the C64, contributing many excellent soundtracks to countless games like Dragon Breed, Time Machine, and so many others. The Boys Without Brains went on to make Flimbo's Quest on the C64 for System 3 and Disposable Hero on the Amiga, both excellent games, and you can find them on Twitter at BWB Games, where you can also find and buy some of their awesome merchandise from those classics. The Rollins brothers made their C64 opus after the fall of Thalamus, namely Mayhem in Monsterland, which is still regarded as one of the greatest platform games to ever grace the system. They also worked on the 25th anniversary edition of Mayhem in Monsterland, released through Cytronic, which you can go and order now. And finally, Thalamus themselves have been resurrected as Thalamus Digital and released the excellent Hunter's Moon remastered C64 game in physical and digital form, and here's hoping that they have many more excellent re-releases on the way for the future. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, on this documentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.